My name is Michael Lowe, and I will be telling you about wireless networking today. Now, can anyone tell me the biggest advantage of a wireless network?
Mobility, wireless.
Accessibility.
That's right, it's wireless. It's extremely easy to set up. You don't have to run wires through walls or any of that. Now, what's the biggest disadvantage of a wireless network?
It's wireless.
Right. You have to constantly worry about things such as other signals interfering with your wireless connection, and it's also a lot harder to secure a wireless network. If anyone just walking by your house could probably see it. Today I'll start off telling you about the 802.11 standards, the types of wireless networks, and steps to setting up a wireless LAN for a small office or home office. 802.11b operates in the 2.4 gigahertz frequency band. Its maximum throughput is 11 megabits per second. And it has a range of 1,000 meters, 100 meters. 802.11b was the first IEEE standard to be released. Its actual throughput tends to be about 5 megabits per second. It is the least expensive of the 802.11 technologies, but has been mainly replaced by faster technology. And due to the frequency band it operates in, it tends to suffer from a lot of interference because a lot of devices operate in the same band, such as cordless phones and microwave ovens can disrupt your signal. 802.11a operates in the 5 gigahertz frequency band. Its maximum throughput is 54 megabits per second, but it only has a range of 20 meters. 802.11a was actually in development before 802.11b, but it came out after 802.11b. Its usual throughput is between 11 to 18 megabits per second, and its decreased range is due to running in the 5 gigahertz band. Now, less devices will be running in that band, so it suffers from less interference, which helps up throughput, but it requires more power to send out a signal in that frequency. .11g operates in the 2.4 gigahertz band as well. Its maximum throughput was 54 megabits per second. Range 100 meters. Its usual throughput is actually 20 to 25 megabits per second, and is backwards compatible with 802.11b. So if you already have an 802.11b network, then upgrading to 802.11g was actually pretty easy. 802.11n can operate at either the 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz band. Its maximum throughput is up to 600 megabits per second. And it can range up to 400 meters. Its effective throughput can be anywhere between 65 to actually 600 megabits per second. It usually reaches its max range as long as it's using multiple inputs and multiple outputs, which is multiple antennas. And it is actually backwards compatible with all of the 802.11 standards. However, it won't run at its highest speed if it supports any of your older wireless devices. It slows down to their speed. Types of wireless networks. Wireless LANs. An example of a device that would be used for a wireless LAN. Wireless LANs are common in small office and home office environments. I'm sure some of you probably have a wireless LAN at your house. Anyone here have a wireless LAN network? Yep, a lot of people. So your wireless LANs can also be found in an enterprise environment, usually on a much larger scale than a home network. Let's see here. Wireless LANs, in order to reduce the amount of data collisions, use carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance. That's where a station will first check for any existing transmission before it begins to send data. If the access point detects no transmission activity on the network, it waits a random amount of time before checking again. The source will do that. When the destination receives data, it sends an acknowledgement back to the source of the transmission. If the source of the transmission doesn't receive that acknowledgement, it assumes that an error has occurred and it will resend its data. The larger wireless LANs usually use roaming. What that is like an enterprise building might have multiple access points set up in its building. And as you move out of range of one access point, your wireless device will automatically reassociate itself with the next one you walk into range of, so you never lose your connection as you walk throughout the building. Wireless WANs. The 802.16 WiMAX standard stands for Worldwide My apologies, I can't really read that word. For my voice access. Now this was made to provide wireless internet over residential areas and throughout cities. It is faster than T carriers and has a low cost for end users. So your fixed clients use line of sight transmission between multiple antennas. And it also uses the same multiple input and multiple output technology of 802.11n. So you can transmit data up to 30 miles with antennas, with fixed antennas, and 10 miles when they are mobile. Cellular networks, there's a cell phone. Yeah. Well, have you ever wondered what all that 3G and 4G stuff is? All it really refers to is the generation of the cellular technology. So 1G would be first gen. 1G was used 1970 to 1980s for the first cell phones and was analog only, didn't use data. So you could only use your cell phone back then to make a phone call, nothing else. 2G was used 1990 to 2000. It used digital transmission and paved the way for texting and media downloads on mobile devices. The data transmissions didn't exceed 240 kilobits per second though, so it wasn't very fast. 3G was used to 2000 to 2008. It rose the data rate up to 384 kilobits per second. Then what we have in use now is 4G. 4G has data rates up to 100 megabits per second for fast-moving mobile clients such as those who are in cars, and 121 gigabits per second for slow-moving mobile clients. WiMAX is not cellular technology, but is considered 4G. And satellite networks. Satellites and satellite networks circle the Earth at 22,300 miles above the equator in geosynchronous orbit. That means that it moves at the same speed that the Earth moves. So before a satellite can transmit its information to a receiver below, it first has to receive information from Earth. A transponder picks up the information and sends it back down to a receiver. Satellite internet users are usually in remote places that are too far away from other service providers. It typically has a much higher download speed than it does an upload speed. setting up a wireless LAN. First thing you need to do is determine the design. First of all, access points are independent of internet connectivity devices. What this means is that your wireless access point is not a modem. It's not going to give you internet access. You need to plug in whatever your internet connectivity device is into your wireless access point. You should try to locate it as centrally as possible in the area to get the best signal possible. And also, please take into consideration any interference that might be near the device. And it typically works better if you locate it at a higher elevation than most of your client devices. So you plug in your wireless router and you're done, right? I mean, that's what most end users do, right? They just plug it in, their clients can connect to it, done, good, we have internet. Sadly, that is as far as most end users go, but that can be very dangerous. Not only could someone potentially gain access to your computer and files, but someone could also gain access to your network for malicious intent. And anything they would do through your network will be traced back to you and not them. Man, actually once, there was a guy who didn't set up his internet security, and one day the FBI came kicking in his door. He was arrested for downloading child pornography. But upon searching his computer files and his house, they found no child pornography. And then examining his network traffic, they realized that it was actually his neighbor doing it because he didn't lock down his wireless security. So they arrested his neighbor for it, and the man was not charged with child pornography, but he was still charged with being an accessory to a crime. So there can also be legal issues if you do not secure your wireless networks. So how to configure an access point? Well, first thing you should probably do is change your administrator password. All wireless access points have a default administrator password. And I guarantee you anyone who's trying to get access to your network probably knows them. So it wouldn't make much sense to implement any security measures if they can simply log into your router and turn your security off anyway. You should also change the service net identifier. Service net identifier is essentially the name of your wireless access point, what comes up when people scan for it. Another security measure you can take with the SSID is by disabling its broadcast. So ordinarily an SSID sends out a broadcast signal to let wireless devices know where it's at. So essentially, if you have an SSID of Bob, your wireless network's constantly screaming, "Hey, I'm over here, my name's Bob." So then all wireless devices that are listening will pick it up, and they might just try to connect to Bob. However, if you disable the broadcast, a wireless network ID that's listening, a wireless device that is listening, it won't say anything to them, essentially. But then you'll have to connect your devices manually by typing in the SSID to the network you want to connect to yourself, and then your device will then send out a probe looking for that network. So then your device will say, "Hey, is there anyone named Bob out there?" And Bob will go, "Yeah, I'm over here. It's a secret though. Don't tell anyone." And you can also set up your wireless access point for DHCP usually. Now in most enterprise or business environments, you might not want to do this if you already have a DHCP server, because this can create an IP conflict. For most homes, it's usually disabled, and it's usually enabled by default for most home networks. And then of course, set up your security options. So if you have an older router or wireless access point of any kind, and it only supports WEP, WEP is by far the weakest security out there, but it's something. So even if that's your only choice, you should probably enable that. because no security is perfect. All security can be defeated. The point is, you want to make your network harder to get into than your neighbors. Because, I mean, sure, if you have web, it'll take them about 2 minutes to crack it, but why don't even waste that amount of time if the person next to you has nothing, and just go right ahead. An example of what you might see when you look at your router settings. For Netgear routers, you can usually go type in routerlogin.net to reach this screen. But different brands of routers might have different ways to access the router settings. So now, next step would be to configure your wireless clients. Windows 7, you would do this through the Network and Sharing Center. And if you have disabled your SSID, you will have to connect to those networks manually by inputting all the information for the network manually, and also telling your computer to connect to it even when it is not broadcasting. And of course, whenever you change the settings of your access point, you must change the settings of all the clients because they will lose their connection. Some things that you need to avoid. An SSID mismatch. Obviously, if you disabled your broadcast and you give your computer the wrong SSID, it's not going to be able to find your network. And you also need to keep in mind SSIDs are case sensitive. Correct encryption, make sure your wireless client is set up to use the same encryption that your wireless network is using. Also, you need to make sure that you are using the correct frequency band and channel, because you can set up your access point to use only one frequency band if it's a 802.11n access point. And of course, standard mismatch. The 802.11n is backwards compatible with all of them. Of course, connecting an 802.11a device to it will slow it down. But 802.11 like B cannot communicate with 802.11a. Incorrect antenna placement, placing it maybe too close to a microwave oven, like I mentioned, or next to a cordless phone. And also, putting your wireless clients too close to an antenna can actually get you out of its broadcast zone. And of course, interference, watch out for those devices that interfere with your access point. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes.
What are the main things you can do to keep security from, on your Wi-Fi in your house? What should you do?
Well, I personally, I'm using a password that is needed to require to connect to it, and I've also disabled my SSID broadcast. I find that those are probably good enough for a home network. You can imagine anyone too desperate trying to connect to some random person.
That's what trying to do child pornography, right?
Yeah, but like I said, there are plenty of other users out there that are unsecure.
Good job.
Anyone else? And that concludes my presentation this morning.